At a glance, this is just a boring old Cadillac CTS. It's the kind of car you'd lose in a parking lot over at The Villages, but this specific Cadillac CTS is hiding a 420 horsepower twin-turbo engine with a Corvette-derived suspension and differential, paired with some big Brembo brakes, and all this can be had pretty darn cheap. Especially this one, as I bought it mechanically totaled at a wholesale auction. Now, when you buy these cars as is, the auction doesn't always tell you exactly what's wrong with them. This one was marked as running and driving with the check engine light illuminated. But since this car has a variant of the General Motors 3.6 liter V6 and right over 100,000 miles, I had to figure it would come with a failed timing system. It's super common on this engine, and there seems to be around 1 million videos online showing you how to fix this problem. Today, we're going to make it 1,000,001, as that's exactly what went wrong on this Caddy. Now, the good news is, besides all the tutorials available on how to work on this engine, there's equally as many parts available, which makes them very cheap. I bought this timing chain set for just $80, which is crazy considering that someone who took their car with the same exact issue to a Cadillac dealership was quoted nearly $19,000 for a completely new replacement engine. And this is just how dealers seem to work today. They'd rather sell you a new car than fix something moderately complicated. So they pitch you on some unrealistic job at a price that greatly exceeds the value of your vehicle, which is what I would guess happened to this exact car, as it was sent to auction by a big franchise Cadillac dealer. Now, when the transporter dropped it off, it was a bit of a mixed bag. It started up with a bunch of lights and warnings on the dash, but it drove for a mile or so before running out of gas. But once we finally got it home, the only real noticeable red flag was a slight rough idle. Now we got the top of our manifold loose, but before we remove it, there are quite a few different lines running to and around it. A few of them are coolant lines, so I 3D printed these hose clamps. Now, I showed this in a previous video, and a lot of people asked about them. These were designed by Nico. I found the plans for them on Maker World, and I printed them on my Bamboo Labs X1 Carbon. I'll link the print files for these down in the description box, along with every other tool we ended up 3D printing and using during the repair process on our Cadillac. Now, I recently got the X1 Carbon, and I can't tell you the amount of things I've printed that have helped me with my car projects. 3D printing is something I've always found exciting, and I've owned a few other 3D printers over the last few years. The problem with those is that they always felt like a chore when you actually wanted to print something. Now, this thing comes packed with so many new features, but its dual automatic bed leveling is a game changer. On a lot of other 3D printers, you have to manually adjust each corner of the print bed over and over, and if you don't do it just right, you'll end up with a bunch of spaghetti when you try to print. But since the X1 Carbon does it all automatically for you, it eliminates a huge failure point, and in my opinion, it's a must-have feature for any 3D printer. And since it has a built-in camera, you can watch your prints in real time from anywhere, and this same camera uses AI to monitor the first few print layers. If it detects any sort of problem, it will pause the print and notify you before continuing. There are really so many fun and useful things you can print with this, and if you're handy, you can really innovate custom tools and jigs for your projects using Bamboo Studio. Here's a set of timing tools for the GM V6 engine that we're working on in this Cadillac, and I actually modified the original print file to have openings on the tool since it's necessary on our variant of the engine. And besides it being super quick and efficient to make your own tools like this, it's also substantially cheaper than buying a set off of a tool truck. This pair of cam locks alone probably costs literally a few cents in filament. And through Maker World and the Bamboo Handy app, there's thousands of really useful and fun models that you can print right from your phone. One of my favorite ones that I found recently is this vortex funnel. It's got these angled fins inside, and it's actually ventilated on the outside case part, so oil flows super quick and it never gets backed up. Now, this printed in the two colors, not because I set it up that way, but it's because I ran out of green filament mid-print, and on your standard 3D printer, that would be a problem. It would just keep going, and you'd end up throwing away a section of this and starting over again. The X1 Carbon knows when it runs out of filament, so it sent me a notification to my phone. I went to the printer, loaded in the white PLA, and it finished the print. The amount of innovation they've put into this one printer really makes the 3D print experience amazing. I've had so much fun with it. And besides the endless amount of things you can print, what's also impressive is the variety of materials you can print them in. You can print things in ABS plastics using this printer, or carbon fiber reinforced filament if you're doing a gear or a fastener, something that needs to withstand a bit of force. You can print it with Bamboo Labs is X1 Carbon. I went ahead and dropped a link to it down in the description, and it really doesn't matter whether you're completely new to the hobby or a 3D printer enthusiast. Bamboo Labs makes the best 3D printer, in my opinion, for everyone. Check them out at bamboolab.com or hit the link down in the description box. All right, there is full access to our valve covers. We can finally take them off. We can inspect our timing system, but I want to show you one other quick thing that I found while I was messing around in here. If we look down on the passenger side here, you can see where there's a lot of oil. That's got to be a valve cover gasket leak here on the passenger side. I think that's where we saw the majority of the drippage coming from. So that would probably solve that minor oil leak that we saw underneath the car. So let's go ahead. There's just a few things bolted on the top of the valve cover here, and then a couple ignition coils and bolts all around. This thing should just pop right off. Ooh, man, these look bad, bad, bad. Well, this would explain quite a bit, and honestly, it's not what I was preparing to show you after taking the valve cover off. I was preparing to show you this right here. We'll get back to that in a second, but this is the dirtiest, darkest valve cover I've ever seen. And it's kind of strange because when I got the car, I did check the oil. It was at a fine level, and it didn't look like it was the worst oil I've ever seen. So the oil that's currently in the crankcase probably isn't super old, but all of this darkness inside the head, all over the valve cover, would indicate that this car didn't have very regular oil changes. And I'm just now noticing something as I'm taking this out. Do you see those blue marks on our crank pulley here? That's another thing I don't want to see. It makes me think that somebody has messed around in this engine bay before and possibly done this job one other time. But then again, look, some blue marks on this bracket right here. That also could just be something from the factory. Heck, look, there's a blue mark on this little valve. Look, blue mark here. Okay, we're going to go with the idea that maybe we are the first ones to do it. I'm hoping that's the case. I'm hoping we see some sort of worn out guide or tensioner in there. All right, hopefully I'm just overthinking it, but there's our crank bolt. Let's get the rest of this off and figure out what we're in for. Besides the cam locking tools, the only other specialty tool necessary to get this job done is a pulley puller. And you can see one of the legs is missing on mine, and that's because I decided to ignore what the internet had to say. As much as I hate to admit it, the comment section is usually right. And well, in this case, the reviews for this tool were bad. Now, the original tool from the factory is like $100. This one's a clone, and it only costs right around $20. And the funny thing is, when you type in the part number for this tool, you'll actually find more listings for this than you will the original tool. Of course, I wanted to save some money, but in this case, it's totally not worth it. It doesn't work at all. So this seems to happen to me a lot. I try to save a little bit of money. It ends up costing me quite a bit more in time. We're gonna have to find an alternate solution here. All right, so the auto parts store had this one, and it says it works for all the GM like LS-based engines, which this one supposedly works for too. And it was only $50, so we're still saving money compared to the original tool as long as it doesn't snap in half. Oh, but it did come with a lifetime guarantee, so we're good either way. We're just going to want to put our little catch basin under here because we're about to pull the water pump off right there. All right, I'm just going to give it a little bit of wiggling, make sure everything's off. There it goes. All right, do the same on the other side. All right, just really in there. Just trying not to scratch anything. Oh, look, there's one bolt. Look, there it is. Forgot one. Here it comes. All right, that is gonna do it. Watch. There, now it's rocking back and forth. There it is. Okay. Okay, there we go. It's off. It's just a matter of now pulling it all the way out, making sure nothing is connected. All right. So here we go. We've got 3 different timing chains. And just take a look at the first one here. It's got a ton of slack in it. The guide is separating from its bracket. And then here's the one that runs the oil pump down here. How's this one feel? Oh, that one's loose as could be too. It's going to be interesting to see where the failure points in this system are. You know, everyone says that the timing chains stretch, but like, again, right here, we've already found a failed guide. And then we're going to have a handful of these hydraulic rams too, and those can go bad. Look, I can push that one in by hand. I don't think you should be able to do that. Either way, all of this has to come off. But before it does, we're going to try and get this as close to being in time as we can. And we're going to start with the marks all the way down here. Do you see that little dot right there on the engine? And then if we angle this up just a little bit, you should see on the sprocket there's a dot down there. Nowadays, most modern cars have tool sets to assist in making a timing job perfect and straightforward. In the case of this GM engine, there's only one set of tools that are for checking the position of the camshaft, and that's it. I actually 3D printed this set, which will cost us next to nothing, and I compared them to the factory tools, and you can see how spot on they are. But I personally wish that there was something that locked the crank into place while you do your work. A hair off on any of these things, and the job has to happen twice. And when you read the factory procedure on how to time this engine, it'll make your head spin. General Motors breaks this up into stage 1 and stage 2 timing. And the first time I read this, I immediately started overthinking everything, and well, it just made the process that much more complicated. So let's throw all the technical terms out the window and resort to some old school methods to help us get this right. Now, even though we lined up these dots, we might not be exactly where we need to be. When you time an engine, you always start in top dead center, which means that cylinder 1 is at its topmost position. On this engine, it takes 2 full revolutions to make this happen. So to confirm we're in TDC, I'll just use a thin wooden dowel and turn the engine over by hand until I feel it get to its highest point. And then we can go back, look at our dots, and see that we're also matched up. And here we are. This is perfect. And we can just visibly see the flats on the back of the camshaft up here. We can check and see which bank is out of time, or if both banks are out of time, by counting the amount of links between the marks on our phasers here. So the marks on the left side of the engine are going to be L to L, and there should be 10 links in between the 2 L's. You can see where the dot is on the gear itself. So we're going to start here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then we've got a dot. So actually, this side should be halfway decent and in time. So if we take our timing tool for this side and we slip it over, it is so super close to the point where I would say that right there, that's acceptable, okay? This bank is in time as far as I can tell. We come over here, we're going to look for the letter R. We're going to go, there's our dot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and it's tough to see, but the R is the next link over. We're out 1 or 2 teeth on this side here. So that's what's causing our codes. That's what's causing our engine to run rough. It's just this side, and it makes sense since we got all that slack on the right side. One chain. Take this off. All right, there's 2 chains. Our 3rd chain right there. All right. So here are all the parts that just came out of the engine, and I have them positioned according to where they came from. And if you look at the plastic guides, they're in darn great shape for 100,000 miles. If you'll see, they say Cloys on them, but then here there's GM and a part number. So this is likely the original set. Cloys does make a set for this car. I noticed it when I was buying mine, but I'd imagine if you bought the set just strictly from Cloy's, they wouldn't have this General Motors part number stamped on there. So I'm going to go with the idea that this was the original timing set. And again, to see plastic guides intact after over 100,000 miles, it's really good. But what I am noticing just on either side, I'm noticing that we've got a lot of gap between the actual brackets for the guides and the guides themselves, especially on the right side bank here. Look at how much movement is in there. But you wouldn't think that would cause it to skip time unless something got jammed up. It's not making a whole lot of sense. I'm imagining that on the new part, we won't see this much play. The tensioners themselves, now that all the oil's out of them, we're going to be able to move them, so we can't really tell much from looking at them. The only other thing we can kind of do is a visual inspection on the chains.
Right here's the smoking gun. It's pretty clear that our original chain is longer than the new one, so we've got chain stretch. I always thought the chain stretch would have to be measured with a fine tool because you wouldn't even be able to see it, but it's so obvious here. And it was the case with all three of the chains, the passenger side being the worst of the bunch. Now, since our driver's side bank is already in time, I just installed the chain, guides, and tensioner, paying close attention to each timing mark in the engine and matching them to the orange links on the new chain. But at the perspective that I'm doing all this, it's impossible to actually line up all the marks accurately. So I relied heavily on my scope camera to find all the timing marks and continue to match them up as we installed these parts. With one chain on, all we have to do is install the next ones moving counterclockwise, but before we do the next one, I figured it wouldn't hurt to replace the oil pump. This OEM part actually costs more than the entire engine timing set at around $150, but it's one of the most vital pieces of our engine, and it's right here, held in with just 3 bolts.
So the new oil pump fitted and our marks still lined up. I went and I hung the driver's side timing chain along with all the guides, tensioner, and hardware. Even though we have a little bit of slack here, that's only because I have not pulled the pin on the tensioner, just so I can triple check everything when we get all the chains installed. Now, in theory, all we have to do is install the chain and hardware on both the oil pump and the passenger side, but this is where I ran into a little bit of an issue.
The second I touched this cam, it spun around real quick because it's under tension by all the springs. That was a bit of a setback, as before we were off just a link. Now there's no telling how far I've messed this up. This side was troublesome in general. Neither the original timing tools fit nor the 3D printed ones, and it's tougher to find the flat spot on these camshafts because they're just completely different than the standard non-turbo V6 engine, which the tools were originally made for. So this side will be done solely by sight. This photo was a big help because it shows you how everything should be sitting when it's done, which helped me roughly get the cams back in the right spot so that we could test fit the chain.
All right, our second chain is on. Everything's looking good. All of our marks are lined up. And now we got to put on the last one. To be safe, I'm going to go ahead and pull the pin on our tensioners. And I'm doing this purposely right now because if we shift anything while we're putting on that third chain, well, basically we've got to take off everything we just did and redo it over again because, you know, each chain is in sync with each other.
Before we install the last chain, we have to move our crankshaft to another mark. Right now, we're in the 5 o'clock position, and we'll have to turn it to 8 o'clock. This is known as stage 2. Since there's only 2 chains installed right now, when we rotate the crank, we're only moving that left bank into its stage 2 position. We've manually put the right bank into its stage 2 position, and while some procedures will tell you to skip the whole stage 2 portion of this job, it seems to be the only way ahead for us since we're doing this by sight. Now we can test fit our chain, matching up its orange lines with the marks on the cam gears.
So all our marks are good. They're all lined up, and I've got a zip tie taking the slack out of the chain, but we're running into a problem, and that's that when we try and fit the one guide in the side here, there's just not enough slack to get the guide installed, which tells me that we've got too much slack on this side, which you can clearly see, and that means we need to take the slack out of this side and get, you know, one chain link over this way, which means that this is a hair off still, which is crazy. There's got to be some special tool out there in order to get this job done on this engine. I don't like just guessing like this.
All we needed was just a little finesse. I gave the gear a tiny nudge to get it to move over, and now we're back lined up in all 3 spots and have what feels like equal slack on either side of the chain, and we can easily install our guides and tensioners. And now we can pull that final pin. This is it. Everything is replaced. I just really hope that we did it right. Now it's time that we check our work, but since we installed a new oil pump, I don't want to run dirty old motor oil and stuff that's mixed in it from us opening the engine through it. I went ahead, pulled our oil filter and drain plug, and just refilled everything. Also, just to make sure everything is nice and smooth, when we turn it over, I poured some motor honey all over the new chains. Now, once we spin this motor, none of our chain marks will line up, at least not for a while. So what we're really making sure here is that we don't have any binding. If we got something majorly wrong and the valves touch the pistons while we're spinning things by hand, it's not a big deal, as we would have to apply a ton of force to break something. This is why this step is always so important. And while timing jobs can be intimidating, because if you do the work wrong, it will end up in catastrophic failure, the constant double checking of our work will at the very least assure we don't have any valve to piston contact when we actually start this thing. I stopped turning it over when the marks on our cam gears were upright, and I did one last check, counting 10 links on either side. At this point, you'd have to think we could just slap it back together and start it up, but all of our covers have multiple seals and they're all old, brittle, and busted, so I started by replacing them all and then laying a bead of RTV around the cover. It's really helpful to have a second person guide you when you're reinstalling these timing covers, since they're big and cumbersome and we don't want to mess up that RTV that we just laid down. So my friend Mike assisted me with lining it up and getting it in place. Now we can let this fresh seal cure while we continue assembly. Now on both sides, if you go and just try and slap your valve cover in place, you're going to notice a lot of resistance, and that's because the spark plug tube seals here that we just replaced, well, they're going to push up against the metal tube here. And so I took this small screwdriver, the smaller the better, and you're just going to fit it in between the tube and the seal itself, and then use the round part of the screwdriver to just roll it in place. Start on one side and go over, and if you just do it slowly on each one, you should be good. These will push in place. If not, if you force that, I'm sure you're going to break those seals, and well, you'll have to do it all over again. After several hours of reassembly, we're not completely there yet, but we are in test fire mode. At least I hope we are. I've got all the turbos kind of reconnected to the intake plumbing here. We're going to take all that out because we're modifying that system here in a moment. But I've got it loosely connected. That way we can 100% check that we are in time. I've got most of the electrical connectors hooked up. I've got our harmonic balancer reinstalled. And so this car is going to run. It's going to run with a few air leaks. You know, we've still got some plumbing that needs to be done. But as long as we can run the car and verify that it is definitely in time, we're good to do our final assembly. The fuel pump fuse actually lives here in the trunk, that yellow one down in the bottom left corner. We're going to go ahead and pull that. We'll put it right here. Let's do our first crank without the fuel pump fuse just to build oil pressure. We'll stop it. That yellow one, the 20 amp, that's our fuel pump fuse. That is reconnected. Obviously, things aren't perfect here, but remember, we don't have a map or MAF sensors hooked up. There's major airlines off everywhere. And while this is a bit of a shortcut right now, I'm hopeful it's good enough to just test that the engine is in time. I let things idle for just a few minutes and did a code read, and while there's a lot of codes for everything that still isn't hooked up, nothing came back regarding engine timing, so we're good to go. Now, since I did things out of order like usual, I had to use a little shade tree trick to torque our crank pulley bolt. If you go and try to just turn it righty-tighty with the regular ratchet, it just spins the engine over. So I installed our drive belt back on, then put an adjustable breaker bar against the frame rail while it was snugly over the bolt. One crank of the engine, and that should be tight enough. Next, we'll put in a brand new water pump, and instead of reinstalling our plain old pulley, we'll dress things up a bit with a billet pulley from ZZP. Not only does it look super clean, it also weighs quite a bit less. This is just the first of a handful of ZZ performance mods we'll do to the Caddy to turn this into a budget super sedan. Right here is the key to unlocking over 500 horsepower in our twin turbo Cadillac. This set of downpipes plus a tune from ZZP is really all you need. Best part is that it bolts right up to the factory exhaust with no modifications or anything like that. 12 nuts are all you need to do. Remove those, put this in place, put this back in, and it's really pretty straightforward. And unlike the European cars I work on, you can actually reach all of these nuts. They're all in simple spots. Or if you want to take it one step further like we're going to do, you can wake things up a little bit with a full exhaust system. But
It's crazy. You can get a ton of power for not a lot of money, and it's really making me appreciate this Cadillac as a true tuner platform because of its versatility and performance for the money. This is why you should always put a jack underneath what you're working on. Well, hope this holds for a second here. Easy. If you're gonna do this, just get a second person. It'll be so much easier. This back half is so much heavier. It becomes very cumbersome, as you might have noticed when I was getting it out. Somehow this still kind of worked, but again, be safe, get two people. Before we go and replace that exhaust, we're gonna just hop back up here. We're gonna attack those 4 nuts holding in the downpipes on either side, and then we'll be good to go. So with the cat just like kind of freely floating here, we'll rest it up against the frame of the car and just give it a little nudge, and right there. Came right loose. And then once these things get turned, you can do the rest of it by hand. Let me see if it will just come down now, because I've already got that one unclipped. Oh, yeah, there you go. I've made quite a mess here, but we're making really good time, and we're gonna clean that up once we're done mounting our new exhaust. Now, since these come in a few different sections, I like to just mock them up on the floor here. And it's really simple. The front section is gonna go in with a few bolts. Everything else is gonna go on the hangers, and there'll be some clamps in between. Before we get the Caddy back on the ground, there's one more thing I'd like to take care of, and that's our steering hardware. Every single front ball joint is cracked. Most of them came out and were pretty easy to replace, but both side lower control arms were pressed in so tightly, no matter what I did, I just couldn't get them out. Last time I had a control arm that was this stuck in place, I ended up cracking the steering knuckle trying to force it out, so I held off and I looked for a better solution, and I found this. Now, this looks like your typical ball joint separator, and for the most part it is, but it's actually got a hydraulic component to it. So when you're threading the rod down in place and getting it around the actual ball joint and stud, there's a little screw on the end here, and as you tighten that, it pushes this small hydraulic ram out. You can see it's got a pointed tip. That pointed tip, along with the hydraulic pressure, is just gonna put way more force than your standard one, and well, oh, that was it. So now that we've been successful on one side, we're gonna use the same methodology that worked on the other side, and we'll see how much shorter it takes. So first off, what we gotta do is remove the tie rod end. This should just pop out. Yep. Now our tie rod end is loose. We're gonna take the nut that we just took off. We'll just get it on there, just a few threads. I'll get around the nut that secures the tie rod in place, and okay, the nut's loose. We're gonna keep it right there. We just want a fraction of a turn on it, so when we replace this tie rod end, it goes right back in the same spot. Pull this back out, and you can see that these ball joints are really busted as well. These are probably what we're making our noise. All right. Safety glasses on. Wow, These things, whoa, there it goes, okay. All of our fresh suspension components are installed. They're looking great. There's just one last thing we got to do, and that's right here. From the factory, the control arms are threaded so that you can pop this level sensor into them. The problem with our aftermarket ones is that there's no threads in that hole. Here's the original part. You can see where the studs should be, and this little stud with the ball end threads into it. So go ahead and remove that. I've got a set of these tap drill bits. This is the M6 size. Let's get as square as we can here. There you go. We are finally almost done. There's just one last thing to do here, and that's to remap the engine computers so that they work in sync with all of our new modifications. And to do this, we'll use the HP Tuners interface to read and save the stock engine tune. Now, the tuner community already knows what's up here, and I am long overdue in getting one of these cables, but HP Tuners is compatible with so many different makes and models, and for me that's huge since I work on so many different cars. It used to be that you'd have to buy one proprietary interface to work on one single car. That interface would marry itself to the car, and well, it would just become extremely costly. This is basically one cable to rule them all, and their software is really DIY friendly and comprehensive with diagnostic and tuning tools. And with the stock file read and backed up, I sent it over to Turbo Tim at ZZ Performance, and they modified it to accommodate our new intake, downpipes, and exhaust system. Now we just write this modified file, and in 30 seconds, we're ready to give her a spin. You know, when I bought this car, I really didn't think it would need nearly as much work as it did. We ended up doing a lot of fixing, and at this point, I'm gonna just enjoy it. The idea of getting over 500 horsepower out of a solid factory chassis with a budget of around $10,000 is something that would have been impossible just a decade ago, but I am just enamored with the idea that it can be done in so many different ways in modern day, especially that it can be done on a well-used Cadillac like this one. And so I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to give this video a like, and also make sure you subscribe to the channel so next time we roll the dice at the auction, you can come along for the ride. I can't thank each and every one of you enough for watching today. I'll catch you very soon.